I don't know what spirulina is.
It's green stuff. It comes from the. I think they harvest that like in water or ocean.
Hello everyone, this is the 5th Epistle Revelation Fellowship. We're study group. I'm Reverend Dr. Roger Paul, and today we're going to study, break the podium here. Paper 142, the Passover at Jerusalem. And that starts on page 1596, first paragraph. All right. Let's say a little prayer and we'll get started. Millie, would you like to say a little starting prayer for us today?
I'll do that.
All right.
Lord, we are so thankful to be here today to study this new revelation one more time. Open our brains, our hearts, our minds, that we may take it in and carry it with us during this coming week. We can follow in Christ's footsteps and be an example to others. Help us to understand this. We thank you again. We praise your name. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Okay. Stephen, would you like to start the first paragraph?
Oh, I'm trying to find it.
Oh,
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Passover at Jerusalem, right?
Right.
Okay. The month of April, Jesus and the apostles worked in Jerusalem, going out of the city each evening to spend the night at Bethany. Jesus himself spent 1 or 2 nights each week in Jerusalem at the home of Flavius, a Greek Jew, where many prominent Jews came in secret to interview him.
Okay, so this is the first Passover they spent after they started their mission. Right? Okay. And this is a picture of Jerusalem during that period of time. And I believe this is a picture from the Roman Catholic Church. But you can, when you download this on in the slides, you can actually enlarge this and see a lot of detail about Jerusalem and the area in which everything went on, including the temple, which is this area here, up here, and this is basically over here where Jesus was tried. Oh no, you can't get to that.
That was after the spot.
Yeah. He loves chasing. I forget that sometimes. Okay, and this is the Wailing Wall. This is all that's left of the original temple.
Where's the Wailing Wall on the other map?
Oh, you know, I do not know. We'd have to. It's
And
probably
Jerusalem
marked.
Had a wall around it, right?
Yeah, all the way around. Actually, let me go back here, and I can't.
That's funny.
He wants to learn about Jerusalem
course.
too. This up here in the corner, see where the arrow is? Let me see if I can get the arrow rather than the pointer. See where the arrow is, but this is the wall, basically, that went around the temple.
Oh, the temple.
Yeah, so probably the Wailing Wall is one of these walls, because it's the only part of the temple that's left. Nope, it's not coming back. Okay, I'll be curious there for a while. Diane, will you take the next one?
The first day in Jerusalem, Jesus called upon his friend of former years, Annas, the one-time high priest and relative of Salome, Zebedee's wife. Annas had been hearing about Jesus and his teachings, and when Jesus called him at the high priest's home, he was received with much reserve. When Jesus perceived Annas' coldness, he took immediate leave, saying as he departed, "Fear is man's chief enslaver, and pride his great weakness. Will you betray yourself into bondage to both of these destroyers of joy and liberty?" But Annas made no reply. master did not again see Annas until the time when he sat with his son-in-law in judgment on the Son of Man.
So it was Annas was the priest that was part of the judgment of Christ. Now it's interesting too that Annas was also very interested in Jesus as a boy. You know, when they went to Jerusalem when he was 12 years old. And they thought he had great potential back then. But as he got older and he didn't follow the normal priesthood, he kind of separated himself from, you know, because he didn't follow the normal way to with his training.
And that's true with all of us actually from our beginnings, you know, whatever church we were started from.
Yeah, and when people see you go in a different direction, they get jealous about it, and they don't like it, and that sort of thing.
I think also, you know, Jesus just said bye to it too.
He did.
You know, I mean, you know,
Wasn't his path.
you can't sit there and get all concerned about it. You know, I mean, whatever, let it go.
It's interesting that he spent so much time trying to include the Jewish faith into this new way, too. You know, because he was born and raised a Jew, so it would make sense that he would try to bring his own people into enlightenment, you know, which he did at great extent. But what he did not do is try to incorporate the new faith into the priesthood. You know, he did not do that, and that's what they didn't like about it. You know, he was really trying to set them free. You know, when it says, you know, when he said, "I've come to set them free," that's what he was talking about. Free from the law. You know, the Jews had, there was 630 laws they had to abide by every single day of their life. So, you know, basically he comes along, he says there's really only one law, and that's to love God the Father and each other as you would one another, you know, as yourself. So, you know, the priest didn't like that. Okay. Millie, would you take this one?
Throughout this month, Jesus or one of the apostles taught daily in the temple. When the Passover crowds were too great to find entrance to the temple teaching, the apostles conducted many teaching groups outside the sacred precincts. The burden of their message was, excuse me, number 1, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. 2, by faith in the Fatherhood of God, you may enter the kingdom of heaven, thus becoming the sons of God. 3, love is the rule of living within the kingdom, supreme devotion to God while loving your neighbor as yourself. And 4, obedience to the will of the Father, yielding the fruits of the Spirit in one's personal life is the law of the kingdom.
So that's the 4 things right there that Jesus taught more than anything else, right? 1, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. You know, basically, what was the kingdom of heaven? It's the brotherhood of man. Fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man. That's what the kingdom of heaven is, right? It's not a kingdom, a king sitting on a throne, that sort of thing. Okay? The second thing is you enter by faith. Why does it say by faith in the fatherhood of God? Because no sacrifice is necessary, just faith, right? And then, of course, love is the supreme living rule. This one rule, if you do this one rule, you don't need all the rest of the rules. You don't really need the 10 Commandments, do you? Because if you do this, you won't do any of the things that's against the 10 Commandments, will you? Because you'll be loving one another. And then the 4th thing is to follow the will of God, right? How simple, you know? It's almost too simple. People don't understand it. All right?
The multitudes who came to celebrate the Passover heard this teaching of Jesus, and hundreds of them rejoiced in the good news. The chief priests and rulers of the Jews became much concerned about Jesus and his apostles, and debated among themselves as to what should be done with them.
Now, why would they be concerned?
Taking power away.
Taking power away from them. And what else?
Money.
Money for
It was a business.
yeah, it's a big business to them, right?
I think it still is today.
Yeah, it is.
It is, you know, a lot of churches, it's a big business.
So is it because like they were paying the dime and these kind of things?
Yes, yeah, they were paying tithes, which Jesus was not against paying tithes. What he was against is the way in which the money was used, right?
To buy the sacrifices.
To buy the sacrifices, things like that, paying off the priests, making them rich, that sort of thing. What he thought the money should be used for is to benefit all mankind, right?
This Brotherhood.
It's part of charity, you know. And your expenses, as he was not against them paying the priesthood to cover the expenses of keeping the temple up and things like that. That's not the issue. The issue is when the priests start keeping the money, spending it on themselves rather than what needs to be done for the temple, and then what? Taking care of the poor and those that need help, right? That's what it was all about.
But what Jesus was doing was in no way jeopardizing that.
No, but the priests felt like it was, because they felt like if people started following Jesus and these 12 apostles, then they would not be doing what? Coming to the temple and giving their money. They would start supporting Jesus and the apostles.
And take money out of the
And
pot.
take money out of the pot for them.
And also though, but their program is a bondage program, and
It
they're
is.
trying to enslave everybody to do what they want them to do, and Jesus is trying to free you to do what your heart tells you to do. And that's what they, you know, they just know we got to have these rules.
Yeah.
We got to make sure everybody's following that game. You
It's a
know.
power issue.
Enslavement.
Yeah, you know.
Through fear.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Using fear.
Okay, Jill, would you take the next?
Besides teaching in and about the temple, the apostles and other believers were engaged in doing much personal work among the Passover throngs. These interested men and women carried the news of Jesus' message from this Passover celebration to the uttermost parts of the Roman Empire and also to the east. This was the beginning of the spread of the gospel of the kingdom to the outside world. No longer was the work of Jesus to be confined to Palestine.
Okay, so this word was spreading quickly, wasn't it? Going out everywhere. All right. All right. Let's move next. Let's see. Come on. God's wrath is one of my favorite sections. Number 2, God's wrath. There was in Jerusalem in attendance upon the Passover festivities one Jacob, a wealthy Jewish trader from Crete, and he came to Andrew making a request to see Jesus privately. Andrew arranged this secret meeting with Jesus at Flavius's home the evening of the next day. This man could not comprehend the master's teaching, and he came because he desired to inquire more fully about the kingdom of God. Said Jacob to Jesus, "But Rabbi, Moses and the older prophets tell us that Yahweh is a jealous God, a God of great wrath and fierce anger. The prophets say he hates evildoers and takes vengeance on those who obey not his law. You and your disciples teach us that God is kind and compassionate Father, who so loves all men that he would welcome them into this new kingdom of heaven, which you proclaim is so near at hand." Okay, so you see the problem with Jesus' teaching right here? Okay, they've been taught from the laws of Moses that God was jealous and wrathful and will take vengeance on you, right? And that was everyone's opinion of God during that period of time. So this guy comes along named Jesus and his followers and tells them that God is not jealous. He's not angry. He is not vengeful. He's a kind, compassionate Father who loves everyone. You know, so this is a totally new concept to him. You know. All right. Let's get into the words of Jesus. Now on these slides, all this in yellow is the words of Jesus. Okay. Here today. Okay. Steve.
Okay.
Yeah.
When Jacob finished speaking, Jesus replied, Jacob, you have well stated the teachings of the olden prophets, who taught the children of their generation in accordance with the light of their day. Our Father in paradise is changeless, but the concept of his nature has enlarged and grown from the days of Moses down through the times of Amos and even to the generation of the prophet Isaiah. And now have I come in the flesh to reveal the Father in new glory and to show forth his love and mercy to all men on all worlds. As the gospel of this kingdom shall spread over the world with its message of good cheer and goodwill to all men, there will grow up improved and better relations among the families of all nations. As time passes, fathers and their children will love each other more, and thus will be brought about a better understanding of the love of the Father in heaven for his children on earth. Remember, Jacob, that a good and true father not only loves his family as a whole, as a family, but he also truly loves and affectionately cares for each individual member.
See how Jesus is bringing the concept of the Father, the home Father, into the concept of the Father in heaven? Because we can relate to the concept of our own physical human fathers, but it's hard for us to relate to the concept of the Father in heaven, right? Because he's farther away. And even more, later on, as Jesus teaches, we start to get the concept of the thought adjuster and the Father living within us, right? So this is to these people a totally new concept, right?
And also he brought out the fact that each generation, the concept of the Heavenly Father is expanded.
More
It
and more.
evolves.
Human beings, it evolves.
It does. It's interesting, our day and time, how this generation, the young people's generation today, they have the internet. And so they have communication outside of anything we could have even imagined as we was growing up, right? So they not only get the influence of their fathers personally, but they see the influence of fathers throughout the whole world, you know, and how they relate to their siblings and that sort of thing. It's kind of interesting how the internet has expanded all concepts all over. You know?
I have a friend who plays some games on the internet, and he is connected with people all over the world, and they have teams, different teams from all over the country.
So what Dustin does.
Yeah, Dustin does that too.
Yeah.
And
All over the world.
I was so impressed with that because what a wonderful way to, you know, to unite people.
It is.
It's not just music, because music does the same thing, but you know, the way that people really, and it's just opened up the whole area.
It's such a pity that someone that understands children's games, things like that, and internet programming have not come up with lessons from the Urantia Book and games from the Urantia Book, because it's so expansive. There's so many directions you can go into, and I'm sure that's to come in the future. But today we don't have anybody really in the Urantia community building things for kids that could really set the Urantia Book understanding on fire.
I would just say we don't have anyone yet, perhaps,
Yeah.
because I'm sure that this generation is going to be just,
Yeah.
you know, it's just going to be happening.
I think it was last year, one of the fellowship conferences, that was one of the subjects, was how to get people more interested in doing programming for kids and things like that for young people and stuff, because games are a perfect example of that. Let's keep going.
After considerable discussion of the Heavenly Father's character, Jesus paused to say, "You, Jacob, being a father of many, know well the truth of my words." And Jacob said, "But Master, who told you I was the father of 6 children? How do you know this about me?" And the Master replied, "Suffice it to say that the Father and the Son know all things, for indeed they see all. Loving your children as a father on earth, you must now accept as a reality the love of the Heavenly Father for you, not just for all the children of Abraham, but for you, your individual soul.
Isn't it interesting how Jesus, being the sovereign of our universe, local universe, the Son of God, foresees the personality and the things going in these individuals as he talks to them. You understand that. It makes this so clear. He probably not only knew everything about this man, but he knew what he was going to do in the future.
And he was so gentle in the way he presented it.
Lily, would you take the news?
Then Jesus went on to say, when your children are very young and immature, and when you must chastise them, they may reflect that their father is angry and filled with resentful wrath. Their immaturity cannot penetrate beyond the punishment to discern the father's foreseeing and corrective affection. But when these same children become grown-up men and women, would it not be folly for them to cling to these earlier and misconceived notions regarding their father? As men and women, they should now discern their father's love in all these early disciplines. And should not mankind, as the centuries pass, become the better to understand the true nature and loving character of the Father in heaven? What profit have you from successive generations of spiritual illumination if you persist in viewing God as Moses and the prophets saw him? I say to you, Jacob, under the bright light of this hour, you should see the Father as none of those who have gone before ever beheld him. And thus seeing him, you should rejoice to enter the kingdom wherein such a merciful Father rules. And you should seek to have his will of love dominate your life henceforth.
So he's telling you he should take his experience from his own life, working with his own children, and come to understand God the Father, right? You chasten your children because you love them, right? You want them to have the best life possible. And that's what he's talking about here. So assuming that God the Father is angry and vengeful and all this, we're taking the attitude as little children, right? Instead of grown adults and spiritual brothers and sisters. So it's time for us to spiritually what? Grow up, right?
And Jacob answered, Rabbi, I believe. I desire that you lead me into the Father's kingdom. Number 3, the concept of God.
Yep. Okay.
And the 12 apostles, most of whom had listened to this discussion of the character of God, that night asked Jesus many questions about the Father in heaven. The Master's answers to these questions can best be presented by the following summary in modern phraseology.
Would you take the next?
Jesus mightily upbraided the 12 in substance, saying, do you not know the traditions of Israel relating to the growth of the idea of Yahweh? And are you ignorant of the teaching of the Scriptures concerning the doctrine of God? And then did the Master proceed to instruct the apostles about the evolution of the concept of deity throughout the course of the development of the Jewish people. He called attention to the following phases of the growth of the God idea.
Okay. Sorry, I'm taking so long to bear analysis. Messing with me. 1. Yahweh, the God of the Sinai clans. This was the primitive concept of deity which Moses exalted to the higher level of the Lord God of Israel. The Father in heaven never fails to accept the sincere worship of his children on earth, no matter how crude their concept of deity or by what name they symbolize his divine nature. So even though they had a very crude and backward concept of God the Father, he still accepted the worship, right? Even though they were not very advanced at that point. Okay. 2.
The Most High. This concept of the Father in heaven was proclaimed by Melchizedek to Abraham and was carried far from Salem by those who subsequently believed in this enlarged and expanded idea of deity. Abraham and his brother left Ur because of the establishment of sun worship, and they became believers in Melchizedek's teaching of El Elyon,
Yeah.
the Most High God. There was a composite concept of God consisting in a blending of their older Mesopotamian ideas and the Most High doctrine.
Okay, so the idea that Melchizedek was teaching was the Most High's. We also have what? The constellation fathers, right? That are called what?
The Most Highs.
The Most High's, right? So Melchizedek was trying to elevate this barbaric concept of God to something higher. What would be the next higher concept? The Most High, right? And then, of course, El Elyon was basically the concept that the Muslims grabbed hold of, right? And which they went from there, from the El Elyon, and kept that alive for a long, long time. But the concept that Melchizedek was trying to bring to them was one away from this sacrificial, angry God, right? He was trying to elevate the concept slowly. And he did a great job, because it changed the world, didn't it? Okay? Now, would you take the next one?
Is that 3 El
Shaddai.
Shaddai?
Mm-hmm.
During these early days, many of the Hebrews worshipped El Shaddai, the Egyptian concept of the God of heaven, which they learned about during their captivity in the land of the Nile. Long after the times of Melchizedek, all 3 of these concepts of God became joined together to form the doctrine of the Creator deity, the Lord God of Israel.
So it's a mixing of what? These different concepts that end up, that the Jews eventually grabbed a hold of. Okay?
Melchizedek also taught that there was only one Heavenly Father, not many.
Not many, that's right, yeah. Now he did teach the concept of the Trinity to Abraham and his son, okay? But it was hard for them to understand the concept of the Trinity because they had a hard time just understanding the concept of one deity, God, you know. But it's interesting, I didn't mention it on the last slide, how Abraham left Ur because what? They started to worship the sun god, right? What's very interesting is in Egypt, later on, one of the pharaohs changed the concept of the sun god to what? God the Father, okay? And he did that because of the teachings of Melchizedek. You know, his I think it was his maidservant or something, or took care of him as a boy, started teaching him, a woman, started teaching him about the concept of God the Father. So he knew he couldn't totally re-change the concept of the sun god to all the Egyptians, but he started teaching the concept of the attributes of God the Father as the sun god, which is kind of interesting, you know, if you think about it. So he understood as a pharaoh that he could not just make a radical change and expect all his priests and all the people that followed him to accept it, but he started incorporating some of the concept of God the Father into his teachings, you know, which is kind of interesting. You do that, I guess, when you're Pharaoh, right? All right. Millie, would you take the next one?
Elohim, from the times of Adam, the teachings of the Paradise Trinity has persisted. Do you not recall how the scriptures began by asserting that in the beginning the gods created the heavens and the earth? This indicates that when that record was made, the Trinity concept of three gods in one had found lodgment in the religion of our forebears.
You notice it says gods created the heaven and earth? Not God. The gods created the heaven and earth. This is the concept of the Trinity being introduced, right? Okay. All right, Rodney.
5, the supreme Yahweh. By the times of Isaiah, these beliefs about God had expanded into the concept of a universal creator who was simultaneously all-powerful and all-merciful. And this evolving and enlarging concept of God virtually supplanted all previous ideas of deity into our Father's religion.
You see how they're changing the concept with each book? Gio.
6. The Father in heaven. And now do we know God as our Father in heaven. Our teaching provides a religion wherein the believer is a son of God. That is the good news of the gospel of the kingdom of heaven. Coexistent with the Father are the Son and the Spirit, and the revelation of the nature and ministry of these paradise deities will continue to enlarge and brighten throughout the endless ages of the eternal spiritual progression of the ascending sons of God. At all times and during all ages, the true worship of any human being, as concerns individual spiritual progress, is recognized by the indwelling Spirit as homage rendered to the Father in heaven.
The indwelling Spirit is what? Yeah. Okay, so you see how Jesus incorporates the Father in heaven and everything now? So we've totally moved from this vengeful, wrathful God to a relationship, right? And so we become what? Faith sons of God. First faith sons of God, and then real sons of God when we fuse with the adjustment, right? You're just going to entertain all of us, aren't you? I'm being upstaged here. Huh? We bought the cats this wheatgrass stuff, you know, to make them healthier. It's changed the personalities of all these cats. They've all turned into kittens. It's amazing. Okay. So we're going to have to start taking greens like the spirulina.
That's right. It works.
It does.
All right.
Never before had the apostles been so shocked as they were upon hearing this recounting of the growth of the concept of God in the Jewish minds of previous generations. They were too bewildered to ask questions, and they sat before Jesus in silence. The Master continued, "And you would have known these truths had you read the Scripture. Have you not read in Samuel where it says, 'And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, so much so that he moved David against them, saying, Go, number Israel and Judah.' And this was not strange, because in the days of Samuel, the children of Abraham really believed that Yahweh created both good and evil. But when a later writer narrated these events, subsequent to the enlargement of the Jewish concept of the nature of God, he did not dare attribute evil to Yahweh. Therefore he said, And Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel. Cannot you discern that such records in the Scripture clearly show how the concept of the nature of God continued to grow from one generation to another?"
Evolution, right? God's concept was evolving.
What does it mean to number Israel?
That's when they started to keep track of how many Israelites there were.
For tax purposes.
Well, not for just for tax purposes, but to know how big the nation was. Okay? And so that when they went to negotiate with other nations, they can go in and say, we're 12 million strong. you know. Well, if you go to another nation that's, 1 million strong, and you say, we number at 12 million strong, it puts the fear into them. They say, well, if they go to war against us, we don't have a chance, So it gives you what? Negotiating power, right? So there's many reasons for the people to be numbered. Now, what do we do nowadays? We have a census. And what is the census for? It's for the government to keep track of how many people there are, what their incomes are, how many poor we have, how many rich we have, and where the money should be spent to best serve all people. Now, sometimes it does not go where it should, but that's the purpose of it, really. Okay?
It documents our heritage too, how we have evolved.
That's right, over time. It's kind of hard for us to imagine, even back during these times, the amount of people that were actually on the planet. We think these are little bitty cities with several hundred, and that was not the case. Many of them was thousands and thousands, right? So, for instance, when Joseph had to go to Bethlehem to be numbered, the whole country was in movement to go back to their homes to get numbered. Not just Joseph and Mary, the whole country was going back to their homelands so that they could be counted within the country, And who was doing this? Not only the government, but it was of interest to whom? The priests and things like that, too. Now, the Jews did not like to be numbered for the Romans, right? But they did not mind being numbered for what? The church, the Jewish church, or the priests, right? The temple. All right. So there they can be counted. Okay.
Yeah, it kept track of all the migration too. That was just part of it. That's the heritage too. But it showed with time, in retrospect, where people were moving to and relocating to and everything too.
Plus, remember the Jews believed that there were 12 tribes, right? So they want to make sure that their tribe was counted so that it would give them more power and more say, right? Okay.
Again, should you have discerned the growth of the understanding of divine law in perfect keeping with these enlarging concepts of divinity. When the children of Israel came out of Egypt in the days before the enlarged revelation of Yahweh, they had 10 commandments which served as their law right up to the times when they were encamped before Sinai. And these 10 commandments were...
No.
Number 1, you shall worship no other God, for the Lord is a jealous God. Number 2, you shall not make molten gods.
What does it mean?
Molten gods. You shall not make images of any kind of gods. What they're talking about is cows and pigs and horses and remember the calf that the children of Israel made while Moses was getting the 10 Commandments? That's what they're talking about, the molten gods. They melt down metal to make these beautiful gods, what they call gods.
Did they do statues too during that time?
Statues, things like that. This was a law against doing that, because the people would start worshiping the statue rather than God the Father, right? So, now is this still applicable today? Not really, because we don't worship molten images normally. Now, I say that, but we have a tendency in some churches to worship things like the Virgin Mary. We'll go in and worship the little statues of the Virgin Mary, or a picture, or a cross, things like that. So some things never change, do they?
I don't think that so many people worship those, though. I think it's more of a reminder of the individual.
The concept of it.
Yeah, the concept, because I was raised Catholic and I never worshipped the statues and I never worshipped the Virgin Mary.
Mm-hmm.
But it reminded me of the process.
Well, it's interesting too that Jesus later on in his career talks about art and beauty, and it's a good thing.
And that is a
reminds
form.
you of, yeah.
Yeah, the statues are a form of art and beauty.
Yeah. Let's keep going now.
Number 3, you shall not neglect to keep the feast of the unleavened bread,
That's Passover, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Number 4, of all the males of men or cattle, the firstborn are mine, says the Lord.
That was for what? Sacrifice, right? They would sacrifice the firstborn to God. Remember when Abraham went up to sacrifice his son? That went on until it was stopped by Abraham, right? Okay.
In fact, the actual children.
The children, firstborn of every family. Yeah.
They-
Did not know that? Yeah.
No, I thought it was linked to animals.
No.
No.
No. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice went on.
Oh,
to-
they moved.
I thought it was,
Even
I thought the
kings did.
children were dedicated, the first child was dedicated to the Lord.
It could be either or, but they meant for thousands and thousands of years the first son was sacrificed. We've had, see, the problem is this: we've had human cannibalism and sacrifice up to even 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. It was a normal thing. They would sacrifice someone for the village. The priest and the people, it started out the priest and the people would have a little bite of the sacrifice, and they'd cook it, and it was cannibalism. And then later on, it was just the priest that would take the bite of the sacrifice. So, you know, we come from a really barbaric background. But the 10 Commandments, that's what this was about. People don't realize how barbaric some of this stuff was, you know. So, and a lot of preachers will tell you, well, that they were just dedicated to them and things like that. That was not the case always, you know. That came later. When Abraham stopped the sacrifice of his own son because he heard the voice of God, that's when it went from human sacrifice to dedication, right? They were still dedicated as the firstborn as the Lord's, right? In other words, they would become priests, things like that.
In Israel,
In
but
Israel,
not the other tribes.
not the other tribes, right?
Well, in Egypt, when they would take the harvest and they would store it during times of despair, they would actually feed the first son the top of the grain. So he was always served first because he was dedicated.
But they also sacrificed the young ladies as blood sacrifices to get good crops too. So, you know, this went on for a long time. Probably all the way up to at least Melchizedek, and you know, that was 900 years before Christ. So probably really some tribes probably still did it up to the life of Christ. And we know that many of the backward tribes of some of the African tribes did that until the 50s, 60s, you know. And there's still some of them that if they have relatives that die, are cannibals, they'll all have a bite of Uncle John, you know, when they pass. It's still going on. So, anyway, let's keep going. Millie?
Number 5, 6 days you may work, but on the 7th day you shall rest. Number 6, you shall not fail to observe the feast of the first fruits and the feast of the ingathering at the end of the year.
2 very important holidays for the Jews, right? Why would you not fail to do that? Because these are the times of major sacrifices to God, right? Blood sacrifices, okay?
7, you shall not offer the blood of any sacrifice with leavened bread. I don't understand the leavened bread yet.
The leavened bread, when you put yeast in a bread, it causes it to rise, okay? Also, the sacrifice cannot be fixed with any spices or anything like that. So yeast is considered like a spice or fixing something up. So it has to be very simple. So when you eat the sacrifice, okay, you can only eat something very, very bland and basic. That's why you don't have any leavened bread. You eat the bread to get the sacrifice down, okay? So, you know, it's like you want to make sure that you don't bring it back up, you know. And even then, if you think about it, to many people then, this was a gross thing to do. Until they start substituting sheep for the sacrifice, you know, they had a hard time, you know, I'm sure they did, eating Uncle Jack or Aunt Ruth, you know, and that's what this was about. Okay, let's keep going.
Number 8, the sacrifice of the feast of Passover shall not be left until morning.
It must be destroyed, because if you eat it after that day, it's no longer considered what? Edible and holy, right? It's considered holy because it's a sacrifice to God. Okay, let's keep going.
9, the first fruits of the ground you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. And 10, you shall not seethe a kid in its mother's milk.
Okay, so why on number 9 would you bring the first fruits? This comes back from Seth, okay? The only way that Seth, who was a descendant of Adam, right, could get people to support the priesthood is they had to bring the very first fruits from their crops and things like that to the priest so that they could support the priest. Back then they didn't have money, so how did they support the priesthood? They brought them grain, they brought them foods, they brought them fruits and vegetables, and that's what the priest lived on during the year. So the very first fruits had to go to whom? The priest. Okay? So that was what? Their tithe during that period of time. And then, you shall not see the kid in its mother's milk. Can anyone think of anything that would make a difference?
I would say that would be a goat or, you know, or a lamb.
No, they're talking about humans here.
What does seed mean?
Yeah, what does it mean?
Huh?
What does seed mean?
You shall not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. You shall not observe. In other words, when a mother nurses her child, it's a holy thing because she's providing sustenance. So you shall not stand and watch and gawk over this because why? Men have a tendency to make everything what?
Sexual.
Sexual. And this is not a sexual thing. This is a necessity for these children to grow. So it's a private thing. Okay? That's why originally they started, from thousands of years ago, they started covering women up when they nursed. Okay, they still do it today. Okay? All right. These were rules to try to keep people under control. Right?
So those rules, those are from what time?
Those are from Moses.
And Moses is like
And
in terms of
Moses
years,
got-
what is that roughly?
Huh?
Moses, what time are we talking about that?
We're talking about
It's after Adam, right?
yeah, after Adam, before
How many thousands of years before
we're
Jesus?
talking about 4,000 years ago.
So 4,000 years ago. 4,000 before.
Before Melchizedek.
4,000 before Melchizedek?
No, 4,000 from here.
From now?
Yeah.
But I thought Melchizedek was 2,000 before Jesus.
No, Melchizedek was 950 something years before Jesus.
Hmm?
Yeah. Yeah,
About 1,000
about 1,000 years. Yeah.
Oh, I
So
thought-
these were the laws that the Jews were living under while they were in Egypt and when they came out.
Yes.
Mm.
Well, no, these were the laws that the Jews were living on after Egypt, when they came out of Jesus. Before that,
Out
That-
of
out of Egypt, yeah, what did I say?
Jesus.
Oh, out of Egypt. Before that, they had the laws passed down from where? Adam and Eve. You know, Adam and Eve had 7 recommendations, right? These have gone on since the Calgaster 100. The Calgaster 100 set up 7 recommendations for the populace, okay? And they were like the laws, the 7 laws. And Adam and Eve did the same thing. They tweaked those when Adam and Eve came, and they had 7 rules to live by, basically. Because the populace, or the barbarians, had passed down to them the 7 rules from Calgaster, right? So, they all lived under the 7 rules of Adam and Eve
Until
until Moses. Moses comes along and he's dealing with a lot of different types of people. I mean, it's not just the Jews. There were people from all walks of life that followed him out of Egypt, and they started killing each other, stealing from each other, taking each other's wives, building golden calves. So it was anarchy at first, right? So he sets up these 12 groups, 12 tribes, different types of people. And then he comes up with what? 10 rules, right? The 10 commandments. Doing this, hoping to give them something to grab a hold of and keep control of. Okay? And then Jesus comes along, and we're going to see what Jesus says about all this in a second.
These aren't the commandments that Moses got when he went on the mountain.
Yeah.
They were. I thought it was like, do not steal and do not covet your neighbor's.
Not the original ones, no.
Not the original.
These are the 10 commandments, and the ones I just read. And then, in this thunder and lightning on Sinai, Moses gave them the new 10 commandments.
Right.
Oh, so
But these
Moses had
commandments they had when they came out of
They
Egypt.
had, no, these were the rules that they were all living by.
before
And then he
Moses.
went up
Before
on
Moses.
Mount Sinai and
And
he
then
got
he went
10
up,
new ones.
and he got 10 new ones.
Okay.
That's why if you watch History of the World, it starts out, I got 20 commandments, 20, whoop, he drops 10 of them. I got 10 commandments, So these were the original 10 that were taught to the Jews and everyone else that they came up with. And they're descendants from what? The 7 commandments of Adam and Eve. They don't even look similar. Okay, but this is what evolved over time. It's like your son taught your son, taught your son, taught your son. So they what? They merge into something totally different. You follow me? Does that make sense?
When did they
It's like
change?
playing the whisper game.
Huh?
It's like
Like playing the whisper game. That's exactly right. Now Moses comes along, and then he talks about, well, let's keep going, because we're going to talk about this a little bit more, how the new 10 commandments comes along. Okay? All right?
It's my turn.
Yeah, sure.
And then, amidst the thunders and lightnings of Sinai, Moses gave them the new 10 Commandments, which you will all allow on more worthy utterances to accompany the enlarging knowledge concepts of deity. And did you never take notice of these commandments as twice recorded in the scriptures? That in the first case, deliverance from Egypt is assigned as the reason for Sabbath keeping, while in a later record, the advancing religious beliefs of our forefathers demanded that this be changed to the recognition of the fact of creation as the reason for Sabbath
Y'all catch
observance.
that? Pre-Moses, they had one group of rules. After Moses, when Moses went up Sinai, came up with a whole new group of rules, all 10. Actually, Moses eventually came up, and Aaron came up with 630 rules. Yeah. But the first 10 were the ones he supposedly got on Sinai, right? So, and what Jesus is saying here, the later 10 are better, were a improvement over the first 10, right? For the concept of God. And one of them here he's talking about was one of the commandments for the observance of the Sabbath was because of the creation story, that God made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, right? And that's the one we're all familiar with, because that's the one they really stress in the Old
But
Testament.
in the Jesus papers, there's a different way to get to it.
That's right. Totally different way to get to it.
And I was watching the History Channel this week, and they talked about manna that Moses was carrying people across the desert, and they had come up with a manna machine.
Yeah, I saw that episode.
Had
Yeah.
to be cleaned after 6 days, so nobody ate or worked. They were all busy
Cleaning
in
the machine.
Yes, they had
Yeah.
to clean the machine on the 7th day.
Yeah. Which is kind of interesting, because in the Bible, it actually says that this manna came down from heaven, didn't it?
Yeah, but I didn't know about the machine. I thought it was just, you know,
Yeah.
just because I.
Yeah, this is speculation from ancient aliens. I think it wasn't it ancient aliens that they came up with this machine that created the manna from heaven.
But we're talking about the ark.
Yeah.
Having it was the trunk that they carried with them with all the things they were going to need for the trip across Mount Sinai, not across the desert,
Yeah.
after leaving Mount Sinai.
Yeah. Because we know what? Do you think that God came along and really carved out 10 tablets? I mean, 10 sayings on a rock for these people? You know? Makes for a good story, but in reality, do you think that really happened?
Not really.
You know?
I don't think God left paradise when all these people are talking about God came and said this to this one, God came. No, he didn't. We're still here. It didn't all fly out.
Well, we know from the Urantia Book, everything that God said, all the way through the Old Testament, even into the New Testament, were always worded by whom? Angels, right? Always. You know. So God didn't actually speak to any of these people, did he?
Always angels.
It was always angels. But if these people were inspired to do things, what do you think it was? Their thought adjuster speaking to them. Now, we got to keep one thing in mind. The thought adjuster, if you're spiritually aligned with the will of God, the thought adjuster can speak to you. You can hear the thought adjuster in your mind. Now, would that be the voice of God?
Yes.
Yes. It would be the voice of God. But you'd hear it within yourself. So did Moses go up on Mount Sinai and hear the voice of God? He may have. You know, we can't say. You know? But I don't think God carved the tablets. I think Moses carved the tablets. You know, I really did. All right, so, okay. Let's go on to the next one. I'm just tearing down all kinds of things today. I know, I'm just awful. Okay. Rodney, I think you're right. You can't have
He
that.
did that.
Oh.
Amidst the
Did we?
wonders and lightnings.
And then, oh, no? Did we do that?
Yes.
Okay.
And then will you
Well,
remember?
no, we didn't do this. I haven't discussed this.
And then will you remember that once again, in the greater spiritual enlightenment of Isaiah's day, these 10 negative commandments were changed into the great and positive law of love, the injunction to love God supremely and your neighbor as yourself.
And that's the whole duty of man.
And it is the supreme law of love for God and for man that I also declare to you as constituting the whole duty of man.
So all 10 commandments were replaced with what? This. Right? Love God supremely and your neighbor as yourself. You need the other 10 commandments with this? Not really. Because if you do this, you're not going to do anything against your neighbors, are you? Okay, and when he had finished speaking, no man asked him a question. They went each one to his sleep. Why would this be the case, y'all? Y'all think about this. When we analyze what just happened, he tore down thousands of years of tradition in one statement.
Blew their mind.
Blew their mind. Blew them away.
Exhausted.
Yeah, because they've been taught their whole life that they had to live by these 10 commandments. First the first 10, then the second 10, including the 7 of Adam and the 7 of Calabasas, right? So all these commandments, they've had all these years, down through the ages, Jesus comes along and says, you have to love God as your Father and each other as yourself. That's your commandment. That's it. So they were, what? Dumbfounded. What? You know, so that's why nobody asked a question. They just went to their sleep because all this stuff was going around in their minds, you know. How can this guy just tear down all these years of tradition and say, this is all I have to do?
And even so, that still takes so long to really process and to change your thoughts.
Yeah.
And, you know, to embrace it as true. You
Yeah.
can feel the fact that it's true, but still it takes time to be replaced.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. Stephen, would you take the next one? Flavius in the Greek culture?
Okay, Flavius, the Greek Jew, was a proselyte of the gate, having been neither circumcised nor baptized, and since he was a great lover of the beautiful in art and sculpture, the house which he occupied when sojourning in Jerusalem was a beautiful edifice. This home was exquisitely adorned with priceless treasures, which he had gathered up here and there on his world travels. When he first thought of inviting Jesus to his home, he feared that the master might take offense at the sight of these so-called images. But Flavius was agreeably surprised when Jesus entered the home, that instead of rebuking him for having these supposedly idolatrous objects scattered about the house, he manifested great interest in the entire collection and asked many appreciative questions about each object as Flavius escorted him from room to room, showing him all of his favorite statues.
Now, why was he this way? Because we just read that they shall make no graven images. Molten images, right? All right, so Flavius thought Jesus would come and go, oh my Lord, what have you got here? All these idols, right? But he didn't do that, did he? All right.
Is this when we first get to call things art?
This is where we get
He was collecting art. He wasn't worshiping these things. He was collecting art.
That's exactly right. And we're going to find out that Jesus appreciated all these beautiful things. Now remember, when Jesus was a child, this is a great story, because when Jesus was a child, you know, he loved to draw, right? And he loved to make, the potter that lived down the street would give the boys clay to mold things out of. So when Jesus was a boy, he loved to make little objects, you know, out of clay. So he already appreciated all these things, and the reason he stopped this was why?
He went someplace with Joseph, his father.
Well, at school he drew a picture of his of the Shazan, right?
Okay.
On the floor, you know, a likeness of him. It was a very good one. And so when the Shazan comes over, he was shocked, you know, because it looked like him, you know. So that started this whole process. He brought his mother and father in and says, you know, you got to get control of this boy doing these things, you know, because of the molten images thing, right? And up till then, Jesus loved to draw and make things. After that, his father forbid him to do it, so he never did it again, right? So that's how he developed this love for art, and it's going to show in this, what he says to this man, right? Isn't it interesting how our experiences and stuff, even as children, add to our experiences as an adult? And it's the same way with Jesus here.
But when he took a trip with his father to Athens, and he saw the
statues?
Well, the landscape and the order of the landscape, and it was symmetrical and beautiful. He loved it.
Yeah.
And his father rebuked him for it.
Yeah,
You know.
he did. It's the same principle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Sweet.
The master saw that his host was bewildered at his friendly attitude towards art. Therefore, when they had finished the survey of the entire collection, Jesus said, "Because you appreciate the beauty of things created by my Father and fashioned by the artistic hands of man, why should you expect to be rebuked? Because Moses one time sought to combat idolatry and the worship of false gods, why should all men frown upon the reproduction of grace and beauty? I say to you, Flavius, Moses' children have misunderstood him, and now do they make the false gods of even his prohibitions of images and the likeness of things in heaven and on earth. But even if Moses taught such restrictions to the darkened minds of those days, what has that to do with this day, when the Father in heaven is revealed as a universal spirit ruler over all?" And Flavius said, "I declare that in the coming kingdom they shall no longer teach, do not worship this and do not worship that. No longer shall they concern themselves with the commands to refrain from this and take care of that, but rather shall all be concerned with one supreme duty. And this duty of man is expressed in two great privileges: sincere worship of the infinite Creator, the Paradise Father, and the loving service bestowed upon one's fellow men. If you love your neighbor as you love yourself, you really know that you are a son of God or daughter.
Wiped it all out
Endless.
like that, didn't he? You know, he was serious about that one commandment taking place of everything. You know.
Like, you know, I was in a meeting yesterday, and they got to where they were talking about even the beat of the music. We can't even listen to a beat of a music. I mean, it's, you know,
Yeah.
it's like they're just born and raised in fear of everything.
Yeah.
And, you know, it says you're not supposed to fear.
Yeah.
And yet they just dig into everything to find a fear factor with the whole thing.
Yeah. Fear.
The world's coming to an end. It's going to get worse. Don't listen to this. And I'm like, oh well. I mean, you know, that's where you got to look at it. And when it says you're not supposed to fear, take that first, and then make the other things, you know, kind of work from there. You know, I don't know. It's crazy.
And Jesus wasn't kidding when he said, "I'll teach you how to live life to the fullest." Right?
There you go.
There you
go. It's really.
Yeah. Okay. Millie, would you take the next one?
In an age when my father was not well understood, Moses was justified in his attempts to withstand idolatry. But in the coming age, the Father will have been revealed in the life of the Son, and this new revelation of God will make it forever unnecessary to confuse the Creator Father with idols of stone or images of gold and silver. Henceforth, intelligent men may enjoy the treasures of art without confusing such material appreciation of beauty with the worship and service of the Father in paradise, the God of all things and all being.
So what Jesus is saying here is, because God is spirit and we know him as a spirit, and we become familiar with him as he really is, a molten image would be ridiculous to associate with God the Father. Wouldn't it? I mean, it would make no sense whatsoever. But if you're ignorant and fearful, these things happen, right?
You know, paper 44, which we're going to be studying very soon, it deals with the artisans.
Yeah, celestial artisans.
Artisans.
Yeah,
And
celestial
so
artisans.
He knew that all this time while he was, you know,
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. Rodney, would you take the next one?
Flavius believed all that Jesus taught him. The next day he went to Bethany, beyond the Jordan, and was baptized by the disciples of John. And this he did because the apostles of Jesus did not yet baptize believers. When Flavius returned to Jerusalem, he made a great feast for Jesus and invited 60 of his friends. And many of these guests also became believers in the message of the coming kingdom.
Because he wanted to celebrate his new freedom,
Yeah.
didn't he? Yeah. Can't blame him. Jill, would you?
60.
5. Discourse on Assurance. One of the great sermons which Jesus preached in the temple this Passover week was in answer to a question asked by one of his hearers, a man from Damascus. This man asked Jesus, "But Rabbi, how shall we know of a certainty that you are sent by God, and that we may truly enter into the kingdom which you and your disciples declare is near at hand?" And Jesus answered,
As to my message and the teaching of my disciples, you should judge them by their fruits. If we proclaim to you the truths of the Spirit will witness in your hearts that our message is genuine. Concerning the kingdom and your assurance of acceptance by the Heavenly Father, let me ask what a father among you who is a worthy and kind-hearted father would keep his son in anxiety or suspense regarding his status in the family or his place of security in the affections of his father's heart. Sorry, I lost my place there. Do you earth fathers take pleasure in torturing your children with uncertainty about their place of abiding love in your human hearts? Neither does your Father in heaven leave his faith children of the Spirit in doubtful uncertainty as their position in the kingdom. If you receive God as your Father, then indeed and in truth you are the sons of God. If you are sons, then you are secure in the position and standing of all that concerns eternal and divine sonship. If you believe my words, you shall thereby believe in him who sent me. And by thus believing in the Father, you have made your status in heavenly citizenship sure. If you do the will of the Father in heaven, you shall never fail in the attainment of eternal life of progress in the divine kingdom. So if you believe that you are a son of God, and God is your Father, your assurance is secure. Right? That's the whole point of this. You can count on it, take it to the bank, you will have eternal life, and you will go on the progression plan to the Father. That's all there is to it. No doubt whatsoever. It's all through faith. All right? Steve.
The Supreme Spirit shall bear witness with your spirits that you are truly the children of God. And if you are the sons of God, then have you been born of the Spirit of God. And whosoever has been born of the Spirit in himself the power to overcome all doubt, and this is the victory that overcomes all uncertainty, even your faith.
So, remember when Nicodemus asked Jesus, how can we be born again? This is what Jesus is talking about, right? Born of the Spirit. When you're born of this world, you're born of the physical world. When you make the decision that you are a son of God, you have faith in God, immediately you are what? Born of the Spirit. You turn from a physical being to a spiritual being. Right?
Okay, so then what we're saying here, the result of that is that you're going to overcome all your doubts. So
yes.
To the degree that you've overcome your doubts is to how much you have been born in the Spirit, okay?
Bingo.
Yeah. You can measure it, in other words.
You can measure it.
Yep.
That's right. When you become that, but Jesus is talking about here, we should do what? Come to the point where we have the power to overcome all doubt and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Have no doubt whatsoever.
You think he was talking about the going on to the national worlds, because we're constantly evolving, and as we move through the national worlds, we become more and more in the Spirit, you know. But I mean, truthfully, it's very difficult to overcome all uncertainty in this life.
But you can do it in this life.
Yeah, you
can.
can. It's just a matter of really looking at this world and trusting in the fact that it's really perfect the way it is. God is perfect, and so is His creation, and this whole creation is His perfect plan running on a perfect scale. And once you can realize that within yourself, that this is just perfectly put together, and then all you need is the faith and the trust and the loyalty to God, regardless of what's going on.
That's right. And
you know, when you can just piece that together.
What makes it imperfect?
That's
non-believers. Unbelief.
Our doubts and our fears about His perfect plan.
It's us that puts the monkey wrench in what? The perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Well, right? You know, but I want to be realistic here, okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
If say like, you know, you have a child abducted or something, okay, that challenges your faith. I mean, we're sitting here, we're adults, we're mature Christians, and but if you are as a mature Christian, still when tragedy hits you on a level you know, or when your child is abused or something, or, I mean, if something happens tragically, it does challenge your faith. Yes,
It does.
I mean, you know, yes, you still have it and you do work through it because your spirit is evolving, but when something happens, I mean,
we have to interact with evil, is what it is.
Exactly,
We
and
have
that's
to.
my point.
We can't separate ourselves totally from it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I mean, but it's all nice and everything here, you know, but I mean, when we're really living our life and things happen out in the world, you know, or you have a plane crash and 400 people die, I mean, that's just, you know, that's really, really hard to deal with.
But think about it.
Okay,
What
well-
Stephen is saying here about the perfection of this world is because of the evil that's involved of the people that have not given up to the concept of God, many things that we see, these tragedies we see, is because of that evil these people have embraced.
Right, that's true.
That's exactly what it is. So that's part of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. If true brotherhood of man takes over, then we don't have these tragedies of
Right.
evil. You know, we don't have people abducting children. We don't have people raping their children and things like that. We know these things are evil, but it's because we all have to come to what? An acceptance of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. Then the evil starts to what? Disintegrate, goes away. Now, it still does not stop natural tragedies. You know, like a plane falling out of the sky because of mechanical failure or something like that. Those things are going to happen because we live in a what? Natural world. You can't stop accidents of time from happening. It happens in all the universes. That's all there is to it. What you can stop is the evil from things like you're talking about, dear, like the abduction of children, the torturing of children, the raping of people, things like that. That could be stopped if everyone embraces the brotherhood of man, right?
Well, it's still, when you go with the concept of faith, and you go with by the Word, God says whatever's going on here, you're not even going to remember, or it's not even going to be anything to have any problem with, you see? So it's, you know, yeah, you still see all this stuff. You know it's all out there. But you know, at the end of the whole program, it's not even going to be a concern or consider. Possibly at that end of it, we will see like God sees the necessity of it all.
Yeah.
You know, to where right now we
Master
think
plan.
there's something wrong. Yeah, we'll be a part of the master plan to see that it was really perfectly placed the whole time. You know, and that's where we need to become with our relationship with God and His creation.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we got to look at those little fears and doubts that are just separating us from that relationship. And we're not going to stop it with fears and doubts. Why not accept the relationship and say it'll all work out in the end?
And it's all,
You know?
all about attitude.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's it. You know.
Let's keep going. Who's up next? You do? Did you just vote? Yeah.
Oh. Didn't we just do that?
The Supreme, no.
The Supreme Spirit shall bear witness with your spirits that you are
Oh,
truly,
we did do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't advance it.
said the prophet Isaiah, speaking of these times. When the Spirit is poured upon us from on high, then shall the work of righteousness become peace, quietness, and assurance forever. And for all who truly believe this gospel, I will become surety. I will become surety for their reception into the eternal mercies and the everlasting life of my Father's kingdom. You then, who hear this message and believe this gospel of the kingdom, are the sons of God, and you have life everlasting. And the evidence to all the world that you have been born of the Spirit is that you sincerely love one another.
That's your evidence. That's your fruits of the Spirit, right? That you love one another. Treat each other like brothers and sisters, right? Okay? Millie.
The throng of listeners remained many hours with Jesus, asking him questions and listening attentively to his comforting answers. Even the apostles were emboldened by Jesus' teachings to preach the gospel of the kingdom with more power and assurance. This experience at Jerusalem was a great inspiration to the 12. It was their first contact with such enormous crowds, and they learned many valuable lessons which proved of great assistance in their later work.
So this is the first time they really get it, don't they? And they see what's to come. All right? All right, Rodney.
Okay, 6, the visit with Nicodemus. One evening at the home of Flavius, there came to see Jesus one Nicodemus, a wealthy and elderly member of the Jewish Sanhedrin. He had heard much about the teachings of this Galilean, and so he went one afternoon to hear him as he taught in the temple courts. He would have gone often to hear Jesus teach, but he feared to be seen by the people in attendance upon his teaching, for already were the rulers of the Jews so at variance with Jesus that no member of the Sanhedrin would want to be identified in any open manner with him. Accordingly, Nicodemus had arranged with Andrew to see Jesus privately, and after nightfall on this particular evening, Peter, James, and John were in Flavius' garden when the interview began. But later, they all went to the house where the discourse continued.
Okay, remember Nicodemus was what? The member of the Sanhedrin that dropped out and asked for the body of Jesus later on. And it was Nicodemus's tomb that Jesus was buried in first, right? Okay. So this man becomes very important. Gio.
In receiving Nicodemus, Jesus showed no particular difference. In talking with him, there was no compromise or undue persuasiveness. The master made no attempt to impose his secret color, nor did he employ sarcasm. In all his dealing with the distinguished visitor, Jesus was calm, earnest, and dignified. Nicodemus was not an official delegate of the Sanhedrin. He came to see Jesus wholly because of his personal and sincere interest in the Master's teachings.
So the Master treated him like any other person that would come and see him, right? Upon being presented by Flavius, Nicodemus said, "Rabbi." It's interesting that he called him Rabbi too. You know, Rabbi meant teacher, right? "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher sent by God, for no mere man could so teach unless God were with him. And I am desirous of knowing more about your teachings regarding the coming kingdom."
Jesus answered Nicodemus, "Verily, verily, I say to you, Nicodemus, except a man be born from above, he cannot see the kingdom of God." Then replied Nicodemus, "But how can a man be born again when he is old? He cannot enter a second time into his mother's womb to be born."
So Jesus was talking about being what? Born of spirit, right? Okay.
Jesus said, "Nevertheless, I declare to you, except a man be born of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. But you should not marvel that I said you must be born from above. When the wind blows, you hear the rustle of the leaves, but you do not see the wind, whence it comes or whither it goes. And so it is with everyone born of the Spirit. With the eyes of the flesh you can behold the manifestations of the Spirit, but you cannot actually discern the Spirit."
So you can see the results of the Spirit, but you can't actually see the Spirit, right? Remember Wednesday night we talked about the octaves and sight? This is what he's talking about. Can't see the Spirit. Okay?
Nicodemus replied, "But I do not understand. How can that be?" And Jesus said, "Can it be that you are a teacher in Israel and yet ignorant of all of this? It becomes then the duty of those who know about the realities of the Spirit to reveal these things to those who discern only by the manifestations of the material world. But will you believe us if we tell you of the heavenly truths? Do you have the courage, Nicodemus, to believe in one who has descended from the heaven, even the Son of Man.
Who's he talking about? Himself, the Son of Man, right? Okay, and he flat out tells him it's our responsibility to reveal these things to people of the material world, right? That's what he says here. It becomes then the duty of those who know about the realities of the Spirit to reveal those who discern only the manifestations of the material world. So it's our duty to do this too, isn't it? Okay? Robin.
So the spiritual world is on a different octave.
It's on a different octave. That's right.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it is. Different plane, different octave, whatever you want to call it, right? Okay.
And Nicodemus said, "But how can I begin to lay hold upon this Spirit, which is to make me in preparation for entering into the kingdom?" Jesus answered, "Already does the Spirit of the Father in heaven indwell you.
The thought adjuster, right? Okay.
If you would be led by the Spirit from above, very soon would you begin to see with the eyes of the Spirit. And then by the wholehearted choice of Spirit guidance would you be born of the Spirit, since your only purpose in living would be to do the will of your Father who is in heaven. And so finding yourself born of the Spirit and happily in the kingdom of God, you would begin to bear in your daily life the abundant fruits of the Spirit."
So if he starts living in the Spirit, then what happens? You automatically start having the fruits of the Spirit, right? All right. Gee.
Nicodemus was thoroughly sincere. He was deeply impressed but went away bewildered. Nicodemus was accomplished in self-development and self-restraint, and even in high moral quality. He was refined, egoistic, and altruistic, but he did not know how to submit his will to the will of the Divine Father. As a little child, he is willing to submit to the guidance and leading of a wise and loving earthly Father, thereby becoming in reality a Son of God, the progressive heir of the eternal kingdom.
Now remember, Nicodemus is a priest, right? A high priest. So he's well learned in what? The scriptures, all these concepts that Jesus is talking about,
He
right?
has a loving heart. Which
He
may
has
be
a
the
loving
missing
heart.
Yeah.
He's got high moral qualities. He's altruistic. He helps other people. So he's got all the things that he needs. All he needs is the step of what? Faith to step into the kingdom of heaven. Right? Okay. But Nicodemus did summon faith enough to lay hold of the kingdom. He faintly protested when his colleagues of the Sanhedrin sought to condemn Jesus without a hearing, and with Joseph of Arimathea, who later boldly acknowledged his faith and claimed the body of Jesus, even when most of the disciples had fled and here from the scenes of the Master's final suffering and death. All right. Lesson on the family.
Okay. After the busy period of teaching and personal work of Passover week in Jerusalem, Jesus spent the next Wednesday at Bethany with his apostles, resting. That afternoon, Thomas asked a question which elicited a long and instructive answer. Said Thomas, "Master, on the day we were set apart as ambassadors of the kingdom, he told us many things, instructed us regarding our personal mode of life. But what shall we teach the multitude? How are these people to live after the kingdom more fully comes? Shall your disciples own slaves? Shall your believers court poverty and shun property? Shall mercy alone prevail, so that we shall have no more law and justice? Jesus and the 12 spent all afternoon and all that evening after supper discussing Thomas's questions. For the purposes of this record, we present the following summary of the Master's instructions.
And I could comment for 2 hours just on this paragraph, but I'm going to move into what Jesus has to say, okay?
Jesus sought first to make plain to his apostles that he himself was on earth living a unique life in the flesh, and that they, the 12, have been called to participate in this bestowal experience of the Son of Man. And as such co-workers, they too must share many of the special restrictions and obligations of the entire bestowal experience. There was a veiled intimidation that the Son of Man was the only person who had ever lived on earth who could simultaneously see into the very heart of God and into the very depths of man's soul.
Okay, so in essence, these are things of earthly possession, right? The things in the previous paragraph, right? But what is Jesus's obligation? Jesus's obligation is the bestowal experience, revealing God the Father and the brotherhood of man. That's his concern, not in all these other things, right? These are earthly things which must be decided by earthly men, right? By what? Spirit guidance. Okay? So that's what we're talking about here. And it's interesting they mention here that Jesus is the only person that could actually see in the heart of God and the depths of man's soul.
As a creator son.
He was a creator son. Of course he could. Right? All right. Yeah.
Very plainly, Jesus explained that the kingdom of heaven was an evolutionary experience, beginning here on earth and progressing up through successive life stations to paradise. In the course of the evening, he definitely stated that at some future stage of kingdom development, he would revisit this world in spiritual power and divine glory.
He'll come again, right? This is the statement where Jesus says, I will come again, right? That's what he's telling them here. Now he's telling this to the apostles because of their ordination. They were talking about their ordination, and the special instruction he gave. But he also says that the kingdom of heaven is an evolutionary experience. What's the most important thing we learn on this planet?
Ascension plan.
The ascension plan. That's what he's telling them here. We progress through life at successive life stations to paradise. What's the successive life stations? The mansion worlds, right? The system capital. Okay, Salvington becoming a first stage spirit and on through Havona into paradise, right? That's the important lesson we learn in this world, is our ascension plan. Okay. Right.
He next explained that the kingdom idea was not the best way to illustrate man's relation to God, that he employed such figures of speech because the Jewish people were expecting the kingdom and because John had preached in terms of the coming kingdom. Jesus said, the people of another age will better understand the gospel of the kingdom when it is presented in terms expressive of the family relationship. When man understands religion as the teaching of the family, teaching of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, sonship with God. Then the Master discoursed at some length on the earthly family as an illustration of the heavenly family, restating the two fundamental laws of living. The first commandment of love for the father, the head of the family, and the second commandment of mutual love among the children, to love your brother as yourself. And then he explained that such a quality of brotherly affection would invariably manifest itself in unselfish and loving social service.
Sir, right. Okay, they're saying the future generations, us, will better understand the relationship as the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. We know that's what Jesus came to teach. But another thing he is stressing here is the family relationship, and I do not want to leave out one thing here. I want to mention this. In Jesus' mind, when he's saying the fatherhood or the head of the family, he's assuming what? The mother also as being part of the head of the family, right? Jesus became the head of the family, did he not? But he also always respected his mother's opinion, did he not? Okay? So when you're saying the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, as a family relationship, we're talking about the head unit, father and mother. Okay, I want y'all to understand that, because it's left out here, and I want to make sure that that's a clear concept. So when you're talking about the head of the family, you're talking about the relationship of what? Marriage between a man and a woman, or whomever is heading the family. Can a mother be the fatherhood's figure? Of course she can, because there's many families that have no father as their head. So what does the mother do? She assumes the role of the father. Does that make sense? Just like in the local universe, nothing is done in the local universe without the creative mother spirit. Jesus is the head of the family alongside the creative mother spirit. You see what I'm saying here? All the children under them all relate to both. And I want to make sure that's a clear concept. Okay?
Why do you think that they didn't mention that?
Because of the Jewish mindset during that period of time. Because during the Jewish mindset of that time, the head of the family, the strong head of the family, is the man. Right? It's not till Jesus comes along and frees women during his bestowal to be part of the head of the family, treating women as equal. Because up to that point, women were like cattle. They were treated like cattle. And Jesus did not treat women like cattle.
I have another interpretation. I think when I read the first commandment of love for the Father, I think he's not talking as the earthly Father. I think he's talking about the Father in heaven.
Well, that he is talking about the Father in heaven in that first part of that. You're right.
I don't think we see
What I'm talking about is the second part. When he says, then discussed at some length on the earthly family as an illustration. That's what I'm talking about.
Right. But when he said restating the two fundamental laws of living,
the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man.
Right.
And part of the brotherhood of man includes the wife. That's what I'm stating. Okay?
Right.
Or it also includes the wife as a head. You see what I'm saying? When you say the brotherhood of man includes all sexes. Because we know what? When we leave this planet, there aren't any sexes anymore, right? There's still differences, but the sexual difference ends at that point.
Well, the procreation capability ends.
Yes, that's
but
right.
The gender difference kind of persists.
Yeah. The gender tendencies persist all the way up to paradise. But the concept of a man being the head of a family then becomes melded into the family of God. You see what I'm saying? Am I confusing the issue here? Let's move on, because we could spend an hour on this. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure we understood that the mother is included in that. Okay. Who's up next? Jill?
Following that came the memorable discussion of the fundamental characteristics of family life and their application to the relationship existing between God and man. Jesus stated that the true family is founded on the following 7 facts.
All right. Here we go. The fact of existence, the relationships of nature, and the phenomena of mortal likenesses are bound up in the family. Children inherit certain parental traits. The children take origin in the parents. Personality existence depends on the act of the parent. The relationship of the father and the child is inherent in all nature and pervades all living existences. Okay? 2.
Security and pleasure. True fathers take great pleasure in providing for the needs of their children. Many fathers are not content with supplying the mere wants of their children, but enjoy making provisions for their pleasures also.
It's not just what they want, but what they enjoy also, right? Okay.
3. Education and training. Wise fathers carefully plan for the education and adequate training of their sons and daughters. When young, they are prepared for the greater responsibilities of later life.
Notice it says sons and daughters. They do it for both sexes, right? Millie.
Discipline and restraint. Far-seeing fathers also make provision for the necessary discipline, guidance, correction, and sometimes restraint of their young and immature offspring.
Why restraint? Because they can get out of hand, can't they? They have to be corrected. A loving father corrects his child.
What do they mean by restraint? Like physical restraint?
Physical restraint if necessary. But probably here he's talking more about social restraint. In other words, if they're acting up, they need to be corrected. That's just all there is, you know. All the way down to physical restraint if that needs to happen. You know, remember the stories when Jesus is doing his pre-mission traveling, he actually restrained a man once because he was beating his wife, right? You know, so physical restraint may be necessary in some cases, right? Okay.
Okay, 5. Companionship and loyalty. The affectionate father holds intimate and loving intercourse with his children. Always is his ear open to their petitions. He is ever ready to share their hardships and assist them over their difficulties. The father is supremely interested in the progressive welfare of his progeny.
So he has to spend quality time with them, doesn't he? Okay, and be part of their life. So if you're a part-time father, you need to take those weekends and do what? Spend every minute possible with those children when you visit them, because it's your responsibility. Okay? Gio.
6. Love and mercy. The compassionate father is freely forgiving. Fathers do not hold vengeful memories against their children. Fathers are not like judges, enemies, or creditors. Real families are built upon tolerance, patience, and forgiveness.
Boy, that needs to come through right now for everybody, does it? All right. This is a great picture of fathers. Provision for the future. Temporal fathers like to leave an inheritance for their sons. The family continues from one generation to another. Death only ends one generation to mark the beginning of another. Death terminates an individual's life, but not necessarily the family. Many times they have to go on without you. Okay. Steve.
Is that the end of those parts there?
Yeah.
Okay, then, and when I'm looking at that, that would also apply to the brotherhood of mankind.
It does.
Yeah, and then also, you know, we got to understand that Jesus, when he took over being the brother father, his finances were very limited.
It was.
You know, so he's not talking about money when he's talking about all these, you know, things. And, you know, it's just kind of, when you take that whole picture in,
it changes it.
Yeah, you know, because we would look at that and think, well, you need money for all this stuff, but he managed it, you know, and
the inheritance does not have to be money.
that, well, he even
inheritance is your standing in your faith.
Yeah.
It's giving you a rock solid faith to live by, and that's an inheritance.
Yeah.
That's an inheritance.
That's the real inheritance. Yeah.
And then there was one that wanted him to marry a daughter, and he said he'd take care. He said, "Your money ain't going to take care of them. You know, I'm going to do a better job." So it's just, you know, we believe in this concept of money and all of these things, and that's something that we gotta. How do you do it the other way? Okay. For hours, the Master discussed the application of these features of family life to the relations of men, the earth child, the God, the paradise Father, and this was his conclusion. This entire relationship of a son to the Father, I know in perfection, for all that you must attain of sonship in the eternal future, I have now already attained. The Son of Man is prepared to ascend to the right hand of the Father, so that in me is a way now open, still wider, for all of you to see God, and ere ye have finished the glorious progression, to become perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect.
He has already fulfilled his bestowal experience. He has the power of all heaven and all earth as the creator of his local universe, right? That's what he's talking about here. He has already fulfilled his obligation to God the Father, right? So he has opened the way for all of his children, all his creation to do what? Go on the stepping stones to paradise, right? So I have cleared the way for you. I have prepared a way for you. All you have to do is believe and go now, basically, right? All right.
When the apostles heard these startling words, they recalled the pronouncements which John made at the time of Jesus' baptism, and they also vividly recalled this experience in connection with their preaching and teaching subsequent to the Master's death and resurrection.
It's interesting how knowing the Urantia Book opens up all these things that Jesus taught us, isn't it? It really is. Millie, would you take the next one?
Jesus is the divine Son, born of the universal Father's full confidence. Did I say that right? One in the universal Father's full confidence.
You said right.
He had been with the Father and comprehended him fully. He had now lived his earth life to the full satisfaction of the Father, and this incarnation in the flesh had enabled him fully to comprehend man. Jesus was the perfection of man. He had attained just such perfection as all true believers are destined to attain in him and through him. Jesus revealed a God of perfection to man and presented in himself the perfected Son of the realms to God.
He's fulfilled his obligations, hadn't he?
Okay. Although Jesus discoursed for several hours, Thomas was not yet satisfied. For he said, "But Master, we do not find that the Father in heaven always deals kindly and mercifully with us. Many times we grievously suffer on earth, and not always are our prayers answered." Where do we fail to grasp the meaning of your teaching?
They expect everything to be perfect, don't they? Life of ease, right? Okay.
Jesus replied, Thomas, Thomas, how long before you will acquire the ability to listen with the ear of the Spirit? How long will it be before you discern that this kingdom is a spiritual kingdom, and that my Father is also a spiritual being? Do you not understand that I am teaching you as a spiritual children in the spirit family of heaven, of which the Fatherhead is an infinite and eternal spirit? Will you not allow me to use the earth family as an illustration of divine relationships, without so literally applying my teaching to material affairs? In your minds, cannot you separate the spiritual realities of the kingdom from the material, social, economic, and political problems of the age? When I speak the language of the Spirit, why do you insist on translating my meaning into the language of the flesh, just because I presume to employ commonplace and literal relationships for purposes of illustration? My children, I implore that you cease to apply the teaching of the kingdom of the Spirit to the sordid affairs of slavery, poverty, houses and lands, and to the material problems of human equity and justice. These temporal matters are the concern of the men of this world, and while in a way they affect all men, you have been called to represent me in the world, even as I represent my Father. You are spiritual ambassadors of the spiritual kingdom, special representatives of the Spirit Father. By this time, it should be possible for me to instruct you as full-grown men of the Spirit kingdom. Must I ever address you only as children? Will you never grow up in spirit perception? Nevertheless, I love you and will bear with you even to the very end of our association in the flesh. And even then shall my Spirit go before you into all the world.
So he's saying, Thomas, these things we talk about are the spirit world, not the physical world, right? The physical world are problems of all men, right? We're talking about the spirit world, leading men into the kingdom of God of the spirit world, right? Okay. In southern Judea, by the end of April, the opposition to Jesus among the Pharisees and Sadducees had become so pronounced that the Master and his apostles decided to leave Jerusalem for a while, going south to work in Bethlehem and Hebron. The entire month of May was spent in doing personal work in these cities and among the people of the surrounding villages. No public preaching was done on this trip, only house-to-house visitation. A part of this time, while the apostles taught the gospel and ministered to the sick, Jesus and Abner spent at Engedi, visiting the Nazarite colony. John the Baptist had gone forth from this place, and Abner had been head of this group. Many of the Nazarite Brotherhood become believers in Jesus, but the majority of these ascetic and eccentric men refused to accept him as a teacher sent from heaven because he did not teach fasting and other forms of denial. Did y'all catch that? Jesus never taught fasting or any type of denial of oneself.
Self-denial.
Self-denial. Okay?
A lot of people think he did.
A lot of people think he did.
They think it's part of it.
Yeah. Steve.
The people living in this region did not know that Jesus had been born in Bethlehem. They also supposed the Master had been born at Nazareth, as did the vast majority of his disciples, but the 12 knew the facts.
Okay?
The sojourn in the south of Judea was a restful and fruitful season of labor. Many souls were added to the kingdom. By the first day of June, the agitation against Jesus had so quieted down in Jerusalem that the Master and the apostles returned to instruct and comfort believers.
I'm always amazed when I hear about, they say the word gain souls.
Yeah.
So, do they really mean by before that they didn't have, many of those folks didn't have survival status? And after keep talking,
that's exactly right. That's why Jesus would say, let's go out and save some souls. That's exactly right. Because these decisions these people made about the kingdom of heaven was their lasting decision. You know how we always talk about everyone has the opportunity in life sooner or later to make that final decision about survival? That's what they're talking about.
but I always have a little resistance to that interpretation or concept, because on the other hand, we also hear a lot, but if there is anything of spiritual value in your life, anything, any like glimmer,
Yeah.
right? Then you are actually saving to go on. So
If you
Doesn't
decide to, though, that's the caveat.
but most people don't get to decide in a sense consciously.
They do, though.
To decide about it consciously, you have to have already a certain level of depth in spiritual matters.
No, it don't take much to decide that you want to go on. It's just a decision, a will to go on. That's all it is. That's what faith is about. It's just a mustard seed. You know, it's very, very small. And it may take, some people don't decide to the very last breath of life, I want to survive, you know. And many of them do it out of what? Fear, right? They're afraid not to survive. But what Jesus is talking about when he says, let's go save some souls, he was serious, because many of these people walking around never made that life-changing decision to what? Survive. That's not how they believed. Many beings go through life believing that this is all there is. And when they die, they die. And if they believe that, that's exactly what happens.
Well, now doesn't it say in there though that, you know, even people that haven't accepted the survival, they go through like courts, and then they try to persuade them. So I mean, you know, it's not going to be something just based, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to try to get you some understanding somewhere along the line.
Mercy.
For you to accept that survival mechanism, you know.
Right, but which means
And
that...
you can get to the mansion worlds under probation also.
Right, but to me, I mean, the way I view it, for right or for wrong, right? What I perceive is that unless you decide specifically not to survive,
Right.
you get there, then you don't survive. Or if there is absolutely nothing, not even a glimmer of spiritual content in your life, then you don't survive.
Yeah.
Otherwise, any glimmer or a conscious choice will guarantee you're continuing on, and so that you get the opportunity to make a final decision later on, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which means to me, it doesn't really take that much to get there.
It doesn't.
Exactly.
It doesn't hardly take anything. It's a good example of that is, you know, there are no atheists on a battlefield. Did you know that? You know why they say that? Because when you're at death's door, and you know, I mean, innately you know this is it. You know, you've been wounded. You know you're not going to make it. Everyone does what? Reaches out, don't they? They want to go home. They want to see God. They want, you know, all these different things. How many movies do you see where you see a man dying on the battlefield and he says, "I want my mommy. I want to go home." What is that? That's that instinctive thing of survival. They want to go home to something more familiar. You know, that's the human animal. That's the seventh adjunct mind spirit of they want to survive, right? Just like an animal, okay? But that decision can kick them over into what? The mansion world, because mercy kicks in. We have all these mercy credits that come to us as human beings, and your guardian angel's working you. So what does the angel do? When the angel goes before judgment for you, they say this person did this and this and this and this. They justify your life so you will survive. So when you wake up, you might wake up on the mansion worlds and say, "Well, I didn't think I was going to make it here," you know, because they had done nothing in life worth getting there for. Right.
Also, I believe that Lucifer in his manifesto, one of the things he said was that
survival was automatic.
Survival was automatic.
Yeah, it appeared to be. Yeah,
after a million years.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever saw anyone that did not survive.
Well, see, it appeared to be that way to him, right? That survival was automatic, but it's not.
We don't need that.
Yeah, but
it's
not. Yeah, but that was part of his rebellion manifesto too. You know, that was his opinion that it was automatic, and it's not.
So it would take a lot to not proceed.
You have to make a conscious decision.
Well, another aspect of that, okay? I mean, survival without being in the will of the Father might not be such a great thing. You know, you can go on several billion years and still be missing the point.
Yeah.
You see? And at that point, you get so wore out and you can't make it, and then you say, I don't want to be a part of creation.
Exactly.
Remember,
in other words, creation doesn't offer me the cake and ice cream I was looking for.
Right.
And at that point, you could choose not to be a part. But
Well-
it's only because you miss the point of creation to begin with.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
remember that even the children on the worlds that are killed before decision age, or they don't make it to a decision, when they hit 15, 16, 17 years old, they have to make a survival decision, or they don't continue on. So we know if even these innocent children get to the mansion worlds and they go through a life, they have to make that decision. Okay? So if they have to make a decision, you know we do, right? Because they have nothing to base that decision on, like we do. So we know that's, it's a serious thing. And Jesus says this several times throughout the Urantia Book. Let's go save some souls. He thought it was a very serious business. Now, why else would he do that? Not only the survival, but what is he trying to do? He's trying to give us life and life more abundantly, right? So he's wanting you to make a decision so that the rest of your physical life is a blessed spiritual life. You have the blessings of what? The fruits of the Spirit. That's what he's trying to do, right? Not just survival. It's not all about survival. It's about living life more fully. It is. Okay, let's get these last couple of paragraphs here. I don't remember who's that.
Although Jesus and the apostles spent the entire month of June in or near Jerusalem, they did no public teaching during this period. They lived for the most part in tents, which they pitched in the shady park or garden known in that day as Gethsemane. This park was situated on the western slope of the Mount of Olives, not far from the brook of Kedron. The Sabbath weekends. Did they have weekends then?
Yeah.
They had a 5-day work week and
the Sabbath
weekends?
started on Friday and ended on Saturday night. So it's really...
It was a weekend.
It was a weekend. Sunday was the first day of the week, which was the work day. And it's not till Christianity came along until Sunday became the Sabbath. Right?
The Sabbath weekends they usually spent with Lazarus and his sisters at Bethany. Jesus entered within the walls of Jerusalem only a few times, but a large number of interested inquirers came out to Gethsemane to visit with him. One Friday evening, Nicodemus and one Joseph of Arimathea ventured out to see Jesus, but they turned back through fear even after they were standing before the entrance to the Master's tent. And of course, they did not perceive that Jesus knew all about their doings.
So he knew they were out there, right?
Okay, when the rulers of the Jews learned that Jesus had returned to Jerusalem, they prepared to arrest him. But when they observed that he did no public preaching, they concluded that he had become frightened by their previous agitation and decided to allow him to carry on his teaching in this private manner without further molestation. And thus affairs moved along quietly until the last days of June, when one Simon, a member of the Sanhedrin, publicly espoused the teachings of Jesus after so declaring himself before the rulers of the Jews. Immediately, a new agitation for Jesus' apprehension sprang up and grew so strong that the Master decided to retire into the cities of Samaria and the Decapolis.
All right. Next time we'll go through Samaria. Good paper. Stephen, would you like to close us in prayer today?
Okay. I'd just like to thank the Father and our Lord Jesus for this wonderful gathering we've had here today. And I would hope that we could all meditate on the things that we have learned here and increase our awareness of God and Jesus' teaching. And thank you all as a group. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for joining us. Please see you.
Walk over here.
Turn it off, huh?
Turn it off.
Can I submit to the group of you